Hi again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mathilde, and I am the marketing person here at Amity. So we'll be starting the webinar right now since it's one. So today's topic is how to define key customer success metrics and goals. And we're very happy to be joined by Kristen Hayer from the Success League. Kristen, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you very much. I'm just trying to get this slide to move forward here. There we go. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this webinar today. I'm really excited to talk about this subject. I think it's very important.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. We're super excited as well. So Kristen is the founder and CEO of the Success League, which is a consulting firm specialized in customer success. And she's incredibly knowledgeable about customer success. We actually did a webinar with her last year about CSM compensation plans. So if anyone missed that and wanted to see a recording, don't hesitate to send me an email and I can send that your way whenever. My email address is in the GoToWebinar confirmation and reminder emails, so you can find it there. So just before we begin, a couple of housekeeping notes. Of course, as usual, we'll be on Twitter, so feel free to join the conversation using the hashtag CSWebinar, and our handles and the Success League's handles are also on that slide and at the bottom of the slides throughout the presentation. Another important note is that we'll be doing a Q&A at the end. So at any time there is a question section in your GoToWebinar control panel, and you can enter your questions in there. We'll be coming back to them at the end of the presentation and answering them. So, but whenever, don't wait until the end. If you want to just enter your questions whenever, that also works. And last but not least, of course, we'll be sending the slides and the recording to everyone by the end of the week, so very shortly. So keep an eye on your inbox and you'll get an email from me very soon. Kristen, thanks again for being with us today. I'm going to hand things over to you. Let's get started.
Great. Thanks, Mathilde. Just to give you guys an idea of the agenda for today, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on myself. We're going to talk about why metrics are important. This is a really critical topic. I get a lot of questions about this, so I'm really excited to have the chance to share my approach with you today. I have a 5-step approach to building key metrics and then translating those into goals for my teams, and so I'm going to share that with you guys today. We'll go through that 5-step process. That's really focused on building internal metrics for teams. At the end, we're going to talk about how then do you translate that into helping build customer goals and making sure that your customers achieve the outcomes that they're after. And then we're going to have a Q&A session, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Success League and Amity. So we'll get started. Why should you listen to me today? So over the past 15 years, I've been a senior sales and customer success leader. During that time, I built annual business plans, defined key metrics for my team, and rolled out quarterly goals. And so I've got a lot of personal experience with this topic and having done this at a senior manager, a director, and a VP level within various organizations I worked for. The Success League, my company now, also helps organizations, a lot of organizations, with this topic. So we work with early stage and growth companies, and we help them build out their metrics and goals, and that kind of translates then into compensation plans as well. And as Mathilde mentioned, we have another webinar that we did a while ago with Amity about building compensation plans for your customer success team. So if you're interested, you can go look for that. I also read a lot of books and articles and listen to a lot of podcasts, and I wanted to share that one of my favorite books on this particular topic is a book called Lean Analytics. So if you're in the SaaS space or the startup space, hopefully you've already read this book. It's a great book. It talks about how you need to focus on a few very critical metrics for your business. So take a peek at that if you haven't already. It's a great book to kind of expand on what we're going to talk about today. It is so impossible to cover everything about metrics in a 1-hour webinar, so hopefully you can do some research on your own. I also wanted to mention that one of the bloggers for the Success League, Jeremy Gillespie, wrote a really nice series of blog posts called The Math of Customer Success. You can find that on our blog page at thesuccessleague.io. So if you want to learn more specifically about customer success metrics, you can go look for that series of articles. A little bit about me. So I have a family. I live in the Bay Area. My favorite car of all time, and you'll see it a few times, I think, through this presentation, is a Mini Cooper. I have one. I love it. We do a lot of traveling. We recently did a trip to Texas where we went water skiing, and that last picture you can see there is this really amazing structure that we saw in some caverns that we went through in San Antonio. So, love to travel, love to do all that. I like to share this just so you know I'm not a robot here on the other end of the line talking to you, but have some things that I like to do outside of just metrics and goals. So with that, we'll get into a little discussion about why metrics. So um, I think all of us, hopefully, who are in the customer success field got into this field because we enjoy helping customers. Because of that, it can be kind of easy to fall into the trap of having a vague mission like make customers happy as your guiding light for your department. Unfortunately, while that's great to make customers happy, it really limits the resources that you get as a team. And if you have fewer resources, it makes you less effective at doing what you're actually trying to do, which is help customers. So goals and metrics are very important because they give you a way to measure whether or not you're achieving that customer satisfaction that you're after as a group. So it has to be measured to be proven. That's number one up here. Metrics are important also because they help customer success be seen as a revenue center versus a cost center in your company. And so whether that's, measuring customer success, which then leads to things like upsells, cross-sells, retention, all of which bring revenue into the organization, or whether that's actually directly selling to existing customers, all of those things result in dollars, and you need a way to prove that to your organization. If you are proving results to your organization, you're going to get more budget, you'll get more headcount, you'll get more resources. And so it's really important for you as customer success leaders to make sure that you're showing your organization what you're doing and how you're impacting the company in a positive way. And then lastly, customer outcomes are something that's getting talked about a lot in our field. And customer outcomes are the reason why the customer bought whatever it is you sold them in the first place and are what they're hoping to achieve with your solution. And so it's very important that if it's not real obvious to them that they're achieving the right outcome, that you prove that to them. And in the case of many software solutions or in the case of more complex products or services, it can be kind of challenging to do that. So while we're really going to focus the bulk of this presentation today on, how do you set up your internal goals and metrics, the step-by-step process I'm going to teach you can also be applied to working with your customers to demonstrate a return on investment for them for what they've purchased from you. So we'll talk about that a little bit at the end and how you can adapt what I'm going to share today to meet the needs of your customers. So that's why we need to talk about metrics. Last night it was exciting. I attended an event here in the Bay Area with over 50 customer success professionals, and we all did a deep dive discussion on metrics. So it's exciting that a lot of people are really starting to think about, how can they leverage metrics and goals to really demonstrate the value of the organization to their company. And it also kind of highlighted to me that there's a lot of different ways to tackle this topic, and a lot of companies are kind of challenged with, what's the right metric for us, what's the right metric for us at the stage that we're at. And so I think it's important to note that there's a lot of variation here from company to company, and it depends on a lot of different things. Depends on how old your company is. It depends on what stage you're in. It depends on what product you're selling and how your customers buy from you. So keep all of that in mind. We're going to go through some general metrics today, but there's a lot, and I can hopefully answer questions if you have them at the end on some specific metrics that might be relevant for your organization if you still have questions. So moving on to how to define metrics and goals. This is my process. So I'm going to share this with you today. This is what I do with clients when I'm working with them on building metrics and goals for their teams. And it's a, like I said, it's a pretty broad topic. So the thing that we're going to focus on today is team performance versus individual performance. So I'm not really going to get into individual CSM performance metrics. I'm going to really focus more on the metrics the team has and needs to present back to the organization. Again, it is internal versus external. So this is focused on internal metrics versus customer metrics. But again, I think you can use these 5 steps to look at individual performance as well, and you can definitely use these 5 steps to look at customer performance. So let's start with step 1. So step 1 is gather information. A lot of people skip this step. This is probably the most important step there is. So it's really critical that you do this. One of the things that the Success League does when we start a project is we meet with a whole bunch of different people within a client company, and we ask them 2 questions. So this is the first bullet point on this slide. Meet with a whole bunch of people, and I recommend 2 questions that you ask here, and they're pretty broad, but you'll get a lot of interesting data from these questions. What does customer success mean to you? And what are the primary goals you would like to see the customer success team accomplish this year? If you ask those 2 questions of different people within any given company, you will get really different answers. And it's very important for you as a customer success leader to make sure that you've got the perspective of all of the other executives in the company in terms of what they're looking for from your team. Um, and if you find that there's a lot of misalignment in terms of what you're hearing from different people, it's probably a good sign that you might want to gather everybody together and really talk about the mission of customer success before you move forward with this process. Hopefully you'll get people generally aligned around what they think your team should be doing, but it's important to ask. Other things that you want to do around the vision are, look at your company's 2017 goals and initiatives and make sure that the things you're thinking about align with those goals and initiatives, and then consider your own goals for the team. Hopefully you guys all take advantage of the various customer success blogs that are out there, all of the webinars that are out there. There's a tremendous amount of content in our field, and hopefully you've been formulating your own ideas for where you want to take your team over the next year. Weave that stuff in as well. All the things that you're learning, this is a fairly new field, and you might have ideas that other senior leaders in your company haven't thought about, and so you want to make sure you incorporate that as well. So take a look at what the vision should be. Then from there, you want to look at your data. I can't stress this enough. You want to start with the data that you have first. I know it's really fun to think about all the things you could and should be measuring, but if you don't have the ability to actually measure that stuff yet, it's not a great metric for you for this year. It doesn't mean you can't figure out ways to measure it in the future. Put some data collection points in place, get a baseline established, and then have that be one of your metrics down the road. But start with what you've got. You don't have to have 18 or 25 different metrics you're looking at. You just have to have a few core ones. And so work with what you have. It keeps you from getting stuck if you do that. It's really easy to kind of get wound up about, I don't have the stuff I need to measure all the things I want to measure. Just start with what you have and then keep adding to that over time. And by the time you hit the end of the year, you'll have most of the stuff that you started the year wanting. The other things I think are important to stress here, look at prior year performance on key metrics you're thinking about. You want to look at customer base information, so consider things like the size of the base, the size of different companies within your base, demographics, segments. You also want to look at any customer satisfaction or survey data. Often that's collected by other teams. The marketing team sometimes collects NPS data. The product team sometimes collects survey data. So make sure you approach those other organizations too to try to get as much data as you possibly can that can help inform what your goals are going to be for the year. Lastly, financials. So you want to try to take a look at your company's 2017 business plan. Different companies are more or less open about how willing they are to share that with you as a leader. So hopefully you work for one of the companies that's pretty open about their business plan. You really want to get the one with the details on it, so the model for the year. You also want to look at other teams and how they fit into the business model. And I think this is the really important point here. you want to try to get ahead of the things that are going to impact your team. Customer success is inherently kind of one of the later teams in the stage of the customer's life cycle. And so, they're going to see your product first, then they're going to engage with your sales team, then they're going to come to customer success. And so you're kind of at the tail end of everything. Anything that happens upstream from customer success can really have a big impact on the metrics and goals for your group over the years. So you want to try to get ahead of that by talking to your product team, talking to your sales team about things that they have coming up. You may find out that there's a new product that's slated to come out mid-year that you need to consider as you're building your metrics and goals, or you may find that the sales team is expecting to ramp really rapidly with a certain segment over the second half of the year. Anything like that, try to identify that up front so that you can build that into your model. And then obviously you want to make sure you have budget and headcount accounted for as well. So that is step one. That sounds like a lot of work. It is a lot of work. The work you put in here is going to make the rest of this process a lot easier though. So I think it's very important to do this. Step two is really defining your key metrics. And key metrics for customer success, in my opinion, fall into three buckets. There's retention, there's expansion, and there's satisfaction. I know that's a little simplistic, but basically you can take any metric that I've ever seen around customer success and you can put it easily in one of those three buckets. So that's how I like to think about it. And the big one for retention is churn rate. Most board and executive teams start out by wanting to focus on the churn rate. And churn rate, for at least for SaaS companies, is usually the metric that's built into the business plan because it's easier to build that into the financial model than it is to build retention in, just from a math standpoint. So this is usually what people are looking at first. And so for churn rate, it's the number of customers who canceled in a given period divided by the total number of customers at the start of that period. The period can vary a lot. It depends on your company and what your customer life cycle is like. But usually this is measured on a monthly or quarterly basis, and it's also measured annually. So other core retention metrics here are the revenue retention rate. So that's how the dollars are being retained over time. Customer renewal rate. So that is kind of the flip side of this. So it's how are the customers renewing on an account basis. And then there's net churn. So if you hear about net churn, you might hear about we want negative churn. That just means churn balanced with the expansion revenue that's coming in from existing clients. And so net churn just adds the money that's coming in from existing clients to the money that is being lost by customers churning, and you end up with a net churn number. I don't believe in calling it negative churn because I think that is a misnomer. Churn is inherently negative. So net churn is how I prefer to refer to it. You also want to take a look at leading and lagging metrics for each of these areas. So for retention, leading metrics can be things like the average customer health score. So if your customers are less healthy, you are more likely to churn them. You can also look at a churn risk rate. In one of the companies that I worked for, we actually built our own churn algorithm that was based on a number of different factors that we knew had historically made a customer more risky in terms of churn. So you can build those kinds of scores. There's a lot of tools out there like Amity that help you with your health score, and that can be a leading indicator of retention or churn. Lagging metrics that I think are also important to take a look at are churn rate by reason. So why are people churning? It's important for you to know that because that's something that you might be able to influence. And so likewise, churn reduction project metrics. So if you have a project that you're running to try to reduce churn, you want to kind of track how that project is going over time. Is your strategy working or not? So those are the kinds of things that can be a part of this retention area. I think it's really important here to align your focus first with the goals of the executive team and the board, and then think about the other CS metrics that you know are also critical here. So figure out whether your company measures churn or whether they measure retention in terms of the business model itself. Choose the one that the board is looking at and have that be your main metric in this area, and then select other ones that you think are leading and lagging metrics you want to take a closer look at and you think can move the needle for your company. The second big bucket of metrics is expansion, and the big one here is the expansion revenue rate. So this is the expansion revenue in a given period divided by the total revenue in that given period. So it gives you the percentage of revenue from your company that's coming from your existing customers. That one's kind of common. The other one that I see that's really common is just total expansion revenue. It really depends on how your finance team likes to report on this. So again, you kind of want to go to them and ask how they like to measure revenue, and they'll give you a approach that will work really well because it'll align with what your sales team is doing and what your finance team wants. Other core expansion metrics could be called out like upgrades, new product sales, partner product sales. Again, there's a lot of variation from company to company in terms of how granular people get with these expansion metrics, but it's effectively anything that existing customers are purchasing. Some leading metrics in this area are product utilization rate. That could be on a percentage or a count basis. So how are customers using your product? Customers that are using your product more fully may be candidates for upgrading. You may have opportunities that you uncover during quarterly business reviews or regular calls. So those opportunities are also a leading metric. You can look at those in kind of a pipeline the same way that a sales team would look at that. Lagging metrics here are expansion sales by product. So you can look at expansion sales by product and segment, and that can help you predict what might be happening in the future. Usually with the lagging metrics, you want to look at those, at least over time, if not in cohorts. Again, I'll refer you, if you're interested in looking at cohort analysis, that Math of Customer Success article that Jeremy wrote really got into some good detail on how you can do some solid cohort analysis on your clients. So that's a good one to reference for this. So those are the leading and lagging metrics around expansion revenue. Again, different companies measure this stuff in different ways, so you want to try to align with your sales and finance team. And even if your team is not directly selling, you should still measure the impact your CS team is having on expansion revenue. So it may be a little bit harder to track, and it may be a little bit harder to tie the work your team is doing as a CS team to what's happening in terms of expansion revenue, but it's so critical that you do that. That is the closest tie that you have to proving the value of what your group is doing because it's directly related to revenue. So if you can partner, if you don't sell, if you can partner with the teams that do sell to your existing customer base and start to really define how your CS team influences those sales, it can be very powerful for your group in terms of demonstrating the value you're bringing to your organization. The last part of step 2 is the satisfaction metric. So this is what hopefully we all got into customer success to prove and to improve. And so there are some key metrics here. I hesitated to put NPS score up here, but I have to admit that is the one that boards and executives often look at the most. So if you're not familiar with NPS score, you need to get familiar with that. Effectively, it is a 1 to 10 scale where a customer answers the question, how likely are you to recommend our product to somebody you know? And if it's a 9 or a 10, it's a promoter. If it's anything less than 6, it's a detractor. And you just take the percentage of promoters and subtract the percentage of detractors, and that's your score. And so there are tons of articles out there about the NPS process, the NPS score. I will say I think that NPS is not the best customer satisfaction metric for a customer success team to do anything actionable with. It is a great way to look at how successful your product is in the market. It's more successful as a tool for companies that have large groups of customers because then it becomes more statistically valid. It is not a great metric for most CS managers because it's a lagging metric. It's not tied to specific behaviors that impacted this score. Somebody could have taken it right after they had a bad interaction with your tech support team, and then it blows up the score. So it doesn't necessarily indicate a customer's real satisfaction with your product, but because it is so widely socialized with boards of directors and with executives, it's a really important metric for you to know about. A better one, I think, for customer success teams from a practical standpoint is just satisfaction surveys. And I love to see those implemented at various touch points throughout the customer's life cycle. I think that's a lot more actionable. You can actually see where you might have problems in all of the steps in your process. You can adjust your plays in your playbook to make improvements, and I think that's an easier way to go. You probably need both so that you can satisfy the needs of your board of directors and executive team, and also make sure that you're helping your customers out. There's also another thing that I've seen, and this is typically with larger companies, is they have some sort of concept of a customer engagement score. That's usually looking at broader things like, are they, a part of our customer forum? Are they participating in our customer events? How engaged are they with us as a brand, not just with our product? And so if you're lucky enough to work for a company that has that, that is something you should be paying attention to as well, and that should be a part of your customer success core metrics. Some leading metrics in the area of satisfaction are average customer health score. Again, that can inform how satisfied they are, and average time to value. So if they're seeing value really quickly, they will be more satisfied. If the time to value is really stretched out and implementation is taking a really long time, that can impact customer satisfaction. Lagging metrics are, of course, the ones that we've just talked about, so retention and expansion, but also referrals. So if you have a way of tracking how many referrals came out of your customer base, you'll be able to see, roughly how satisfied they were at the point where they were doing the referrals. So that's another way to look at an NPS-related thing without actually just using NPS for that. So those are all of the satisfaction metrics that are kind of the bigger ones. Again, I'll emphasize that in each of these buckets, there are probably hundreds of different types of metrics that you could look at. You need to find the ones that really are important for your organization. And again, it's going to be based on the age of your organization, the age of your product, the size of your customers that you're working with, how many customers each of your CSMs has, and things like that. I also would recommend here under the satisfaction bucket that you try to look at qualitative data as well as just the quantitative data. I think that gives you a richer idea of why customers are satisfied or not satisfied, and that can help inform some of the initiatives that you put in place. So that is step 2. Step 3, here what you're really going to do is translate those metrics that you just came up with into goals for your team. So goals should be challenging but achievable. If they're not challenging, you're going to get some pushback from your leadership team. But if they're not achievable, you're going to have a very, very frustrated team that feels like they can never achieve their goals. So you need to find that balance. Goals should be in the control of the team you're building them for. So it's okay for small things to be outside of the control of your team because you can't control everything in the world. But it's not okay for the majority of the goal to be outside of their control. It's really discouraging. This is why NPS can be a really frustrating goal for you to give your customer success team, because they can influence it to some degree, but they don't have total control. Product issues play into NPS. Branding issues play into NPS. If somebody in your organization does something bad from a PR standpoint, that can play into NPS. So, that's an example of one that can be really tough to have as a goal for your team. I'll tell you a little story. So one of the organizations I worked for, I headed up the customer success team, but also technical support team. And we had goals for the technical support team members around improving the customer satisfaction scores that they had with each tech support interaction. We had a major issue in that organization that blew up our support lines for about a month and a half. And so unfortunately, that quarter's metrics were way, way off. And the team started to get really discouraged because they felt like, oh my gosh, we've been doing our best and we're trying to, we're really trying to make things work for these customers, but this big bug that hit our system is having a huge impact, on our ability to help the clients. What we ended up doing there was changing the metric for that month that we were measuring, and shifting the goals and kind of making that an exception month. It would have been too discouraging for the team otherwise. And so, just as you're thinking about how you translate your metrics into goals, keep in mind that you want to make sure that they're achievable and they're within the control of your group for the most part. And you can't always make exceptions, like we did. So use SMART goals. If you don't know what SMART goals are, you can go look that up online. But basically, a bad example is we want to make our customers happier. It's super fluffy and not really a great concrete goal to give your team. A better example is increase NPS by 2 points over the next 6 months. So that's an example of a SMART goal. So what you want to do is you want to translate your metrics into goals by looking at what your metrics are and then coming up with SMART goals related to those. So here's some examples of these. So let's say gross churn is one of your key metrics. Your goal could be you want to reduce gross churn to under 10% by the end of 2017. Let's say churn rate due to product issues has been a problem for you in the past. So you want to have that, you want to measure that, and you want to look at how you improve in that area over the year. And let's say you know that there's a major product enhancement that's coming out that's going to impact this halfway through the year. You could have a goal like reduce churn due to product issues by 50% in the second half of 2017. So you can see these goals are really concrete and they really really define what you're after, both in terms of the numbers, but also in terms of the time. Upgrade revenue. So upgrade 25% of the customer base to the superior plan by the end of 2017. That could be a goal that you have. And increase the average customer health score by 2% each month in 2017. So those are just some examples. You'll get the slide deck. You can think about how you might want to do this for the metrics that you want to make sure you measure. What I will say here is that it's really important that you think about not having too many goals for your team. You probably, as a manager, have many, many, many metrics that you want to take a look at because you want to see how things are going. You can't turn each and every one of those into a goal for your team. Your team should really have somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 5 goals max at any given quarter. Any more than that, and it gets really hard for a CSM to decide what to focus on, and it gets really challenging for you as a leader to manage whether or not they're hitting their goals and make decisions about performance and things like that. So kind of keep it to that 2 to 5 goal area. So I'm going to take these goals that I just highlighted here and show you how I like to translate those into numbers that then I can share with the company and with the finance team. So what I like to do is just list all those goals down the left-hand side of the screen. And I use spreadsheets for this. If you're, I think I've said this in prior webinars, but if you're not comfortable with spreadsheets and you're a customer success leader, you need to get comfortable with them. There's great classes for that on lynda.com, so go take a class or two if you're not comfortable with how to do this. But I think finance teams speak the language of spreadsheet and numbers, and you need to be able to do that too. So what I do then is look at the baseline metrics. So all that research I did back in the early stages, so the gather information stage, now comes into play because I know what the baseline metric is for each of these key metrics. And then I know where I'm trying to get to. That's the ending metric that you see off on the right-hand side of the screen. So then I can break it down. Note a couple of things. You can break your metrics down into monthly or quarterly goals. I always like to see them monthly. Personally, this is just a personal preference, but then sometimes I will socialize them with my team on a quarterly basis. If you have a compensation plan that pays out monthly, you're going to want to have this be a monthly plan. Not every goal needs to start at the beginning of the year, so you can see that I've got one that doesn't start until mid-year because that was the one where I said, hey, there's a product enhancement coming out that's going to enable me to make some real change. So you don't have to have everything start right in January 1. Um, if you have a business that has heavy seasonality, you probably want to build your seasonality into your plans. So you may have certain months that are higher and other months that are lower. So instead of, for example, for this upgrade revenue um, plan here, you might want to not have it be 21 every single month. It might be, 15 in January. Things start ramping up in February, so it's 16, and then you kind of build that seasonality in over the course of the year. And then you want to make sure that, as you go through this plan, the way that you've got it broken down achieves the SMART goals that you outlined. So again, this slide deck will be shared with you so you can see this example. It doesn't have to be complicated. This is something that is pretty simple. I think it's easiest to share this with your finance team if it is simple, as long as you have the backup data on where those baseline metrics came from. Okay, so step 4, roll out your goals. This is pretty easy. I will say this number 1 up here, get approval, is critical. So you want to loop back around to all those people that you talked to in step 1 and make sure that what you've pulled together makes sense to them and achieves the goals that they have for the customer success group. So it might mean talking to your finance people, your CEO, the other executives in your company, but make sure you do that. Once you've got approval from everybody that needs to approve it, you want to talk to your team, both in team meetings and then individually in your one-on-ones. Hopefully you're doing that. If you don't agree that you should be having regular team meetings and one-on-ones with your team, I would encourage you to go listen to a podcast called Manager Tools. It's a really, really amazing podcast. It's been out for a long time, and they talk about why those two kinds of meetings are really important. I think they are very important in my experience as an executive and as a manager over time. I have found that the two most powerful meetings that I have are team meetings every week and one-on-one meetings every week with the people that report directly to me. So they have some good suggestions on that podcast about how you can roll that out. So you want to make sure you're regularly discussing these goals. Part of how you're going to drive performance from your team is to be talking about what you've set out as your goals on a regular basis. So make sure you're doing that. And then you want to make sure that you're reporting results to your company. A lot of kind of mid-level customer success leaders forget that part. When you're a customer success leader, you're the PR voice of your team to the rest of the company. And so it's very important not just that you're achieving results and you're celebrating them with your team and you're getting excited about what you're doing, but you actually have to share that outside of your group. People aren't just going to be proactively looking at your team and going, gosh, aren't they doing great stuff? You have to go out and you have to toot your own horn a little bit. So, as you're doing that and you're presenting results to the company, you want to make sure that those are in a format that is easy to understand. You want to make sure they're in a format that the finance team can use, because what they like to do is they like to take what you've just shown people and then plop it into their business model so they can play around with the numbers. So make sure it's in a format they can use. And then you want to make sure that it's presented consistently. So one of the things that's true is people get used to seeing numbers and then they start to think about them more. So what you want is you want everybody in your company to be thinking about customer success, and you want them to think about ways that they can help you and your team do better for your customers. And so the more you can be consistent in how you present your results to the company, the stickier that information will be in people's brains, and the more likely that they'll be thinking about customer success as they go throughout the rest of what they do. So be consistent in how you present it. And along those lines, we have step 5. So this is how do you want to report on these metrics? So 2 things I'll point out here. You want to go from being tactical on a short-term basis to being more strategic on a long-term basis. And you want to be more team-oriented in the weekly reporting. And as you go toward monthly or quarterly reporting, have that be more focused on reporting out to the company. So on the weekly reporting, what you're doing is you're looking for trends and issues, you're reviewing individual results with team members. This is where you can make quick changes to tactics mid-month. So if you have certain metrics where you can really turn the dial on a micro basis, those are the things you want to be looking at weekly. On a monthly basis, you want to review team results with a group. You want to review year-to-date results with your manager. And then you can make, on a monthly basis, changes to initiatives if you need to. So if you have a major initiative and you just got terrible results in a month, you can kind of look for ways to tweak that and make changes. And then on a quarterly basis, you should be addressing issues that are kind of major issues by adjusting the metrics and goals if needed. It would be great if you could just put a metrics and goals plan together and count on it never changing over the course of the year. But I'll be honest, in 15 years of senior leadership roles, I have never had a year where I've not changed a metric. So at some point, you'll run into that reality where you need to change something so that your team is either your team isn't stuck with super unrealistic goals, or on the flip side, your team isn't blowing by goals that were set too low to begin with. So plan on change happening. Usually, though, you want to limit that to happening on a quarterly basis so you're not making micro changes all throughout the year. And then you want to report your results to the company, the leadership, and the board on a quarterly basis. So again, I want to emphasize here, you need to look for ways to share your results with the rest of the company. That can help really drive a focus on customers for everybody in the company, and also, sort of sets your success team up as a organization in the company that's really valued. And so make sure that you're thinking about not just reporting down, but reporting up and out. The last thing I wanted to talk about today before we get to to the questions is customer goals. So with customer goals, there's been a lot of talk about goals and outcomes, recently in the customer success area. We all understand that if a customer is not achieving the outcomes they hoped for when they purchased your solution, they're not going to stick around long term. And so we're trying to figure out ways that we can get to what was the customer after and how can we help demonstrate that they are achieving the goals that they had. So the first thing you need to do here is, and again, it's really 5 steps. So talk about goals and outcomes with the customer from day one. It helps also to have gotten a little update from your salesperson right at the beginning of the relationship, and the salesperson can give you their perspective on why the customer bought the solution. So hopefully, hopefully that happens. But if not, at the very least, as you first start engaging with a customer, you can start to talk about, what was the reason that you bought this? What were you after? While there is a lot of variation in terms of what customers will say, I find for my own teams and for the companies that I work with that generally the things that they're after can be bucketed into somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 common things that you hear. So it's not like you have to completely customize this for each and every customer. Your bigger customers you might want to, but typically you'll find that there's commonalities between your clients. And so talk about what their goals and outcomes are, and if you can kind of put them into okay, for this particular outcome that somebody's out after, we're going to measure this particular metric. If you can kind of get scientific about it, it makes this process a little bit easier. But you definitely always want to have that conversation and not make assumptions. Then you want to gather existing data and metrics. So one thing I'll point out here is that in addition to whatever you have as a company, ask about what the customer has access to. There is a very good chance that you will need to get some data from them in order to prove return on investment. So you may need some stuff on their side, so you want to have that conversation about what do they have that you could leverage as well as what you've got. And then you want to come up with a simple format that you can show the customer regularly. Again, so you just go through the steps that we talked about. You can come up with a spreadsheet type format. Maybe you have something prettier you like to use that's in a PowerPoint or something like that. That's fine. The main thing is that it's consistent. And so in the first quarterly review, you establish a baseline metric with your client, and then that format does not change from quarter to quarter. And again, it gets the customer used to seeing that format. It makes it sticky in their mind, and it gets them thinking about that metric as they go through their day-to-day. So those are the three main things I'll call out here about customer goals. Otherwise, you can just go through this same process with them. Now, I understand that it's not always really easy to draw out that kind of information from customers, so you may have more or less success with this depending on what what kind of clients you've got, but it's important to try. Uh, as far as a one-to-many approach, I think the thing that you can do if you've got a one-to-many approach to customer success is you can start to talk to customers that are maybe in your high-touch group, find out what the commonalities are in terms of what their goals might be, and think about ways to automate the discovery of customer goals in your one-to-many group. If anybody has questions about that, we can talk about that further. That is what I had for today. Just to kind of wrap up, as we go into the questions, I want to say that metrics and metrics-based goals are really critical to proving the value of your customer success team, both to your organization and to your customers. This is a really big topic. I cruised through it in 45 minutes, so obviously I didn't get to a ton of details, but hopefully this is enough to get you started. And at this point, I think we're going to open it up to questions. So Matilda, do we have any questions that have come in from the group?
Yeah, we already have some questions. So now would be a great time if anyone has more questions, they want to send it to us in the question widget in the side panel. But first of all, thank you so much, Kristen. That was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
And why don't we get started? So someone asked, how does an organization measure average time to value?
I think that I've seen a lot of variation from company to company on that. I think it goes back to understanding what the goals are for that customer. And so, kind of on my last slide, I talked a little bit about how you figure out customer goals. Value is what the customer thinks value is, not what you as an organization that has sold them something thinks value is. And so it's important for you to know what they think the value is, and then that's where you're going to be able to determine what that timing is like. Again, what helps make this a little bit easier is if you've got if you've got some commonalities that you see from customer to customer, you can probably start to figure out what those core metrics are that you think are really important, and tie those to the common goals that your customers have. And then from there, you can kind of figure out what the time to value is, but there's a lot of variation on that. And so the reality is you may have two customers that look identical, and one of them may have a very different goal than the other. And even though they're identical in every other way, one of them may get to their value sooner than the other because their goals are different for your solution. So keep that in mind.
Awesome. So another question here is, what other alternative options do you recommend for calculating customer health scores?
I guess if I'm thinking alternative options, so customer health scores are, commonly for a lot of companies sort of calculated through tools like Amity and some of the other customer success solutions out there, and they have, proprietary algorithms that help determine customer health. I think when I was at Jazz, one of the things that we did was we ended up, because we felt like customer health was not just product usage, although those are very closely related, it's not the entirety of customer health. And we wanted to look at some other things. So we used the customer success tool that we had as one piece of information that informed our overall customer health score, but we built in a number of other things as well. We built in geographic location, and the reason for that is we had a competitor that we knew was very active in two geographic regions in the United States, and so we had a high churn risk in those areas. There's other things that you might have for your organization, so you want to look at both product usage details, but also other things that could impact health. Some other things that we looked at were, how long of a contract are they on? how old of a customer are they? How long have they been with the company? Customers that had been with the company um, for a really long time had adopted the product when it was a lot less robust and had not subsequently always adopted the new pieces of the solution. And so we wanted to make sure that we captured the fact that the customers that weren't using the product maybe as robustly as some of the newer clients might be more at risk of churning, even though some of the core usage stats look the same. So we built in things like that. So you really want to look at, holistically, what are the things that make your customers more likely to churn outside of just product usage, and build some of that stuff in. You can do that by creating your own algorithm. You can do that in a really scrappy way by tracking those different pieces individually. We built an algorithm that incorporated some data from our CS solution, and we fed that into our CRM system. And so we had a field there that captured that. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. We have another question that has to do with health scores, and it
Okay.
is, how does customer engagement score and customer health score overlap or differ?
Yeah, so customer health score is around typically around more product usage and that customer's engagement with your solution specifically. So not just how not just how are they using your product, but things like what I just described. So, are they located somewhere that would put them at a greater risk, or, have they been with the company longer that would put them at a greater risk? Customer engagement is typically much broader, so that's how are they engaging with your brand. So while customer health may be a piece of engagement, it's not the entirety of engagement. Engagement is things like, are they also utilizing or going, utilizing your forum, going to your events, engaging with your brand in bigger ways, referring people to you. So at the Success League, we have a 12-point engagement model that we use, where we look for our clients at how engaged our customers. It's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we look at okay, are they getting the most out of their product? That's at the bottom, and that's kind of most related to the health score. And then as it goes up, are they feeling like they're engaged with other people who are using the solution? Are they feeling like they're engaging with the company in ways that are educating them? So all of those kinds of things are part of an overall engagement score. So engagement score is a little broader.
Awesome, great.
Other questions?
Yeah, so we have some other questions lined up, and I encourage everyone else to send us their questions while we answer them. But someone's asking, what type of questions do you ask in a customer satisfaction survey, and how do you incentivize the customers to respond to it?
I think the biggest incentive for customers to respond to a survey is to make the survey super short. Nobody loves to go. I'm sure there are people out there that love to fill out surveys. Most people I have found do not like filling out surveys. So um, I love the format of the NPS question. I think a single question, 1 to 10 scale, um, where the person can answer it really quickly and easily, and maybe provide a little bit of detail in a text area if they want to, is super. I think people are way, way, way more likely to actually complete that. And so my preferred method of doing customer satisfaction surveys is to embed those short question um, surveys all throughout the entire customer lifecycle. So at different points inside the product, at different points when they've engaged with somebody from customer support or customer success, right after the quarterly business review. So those are places where those surveys, make a lot of sense and can provide you with some really great data on, is that part of your customer journey working well? So I like that. Now, there are times when it does make sense to try to get people to do longer surveys. Things like right after you've put them through a big training program or a big implementation process, you might want to gather some additional details on those kinds of things. I don't think you have to get fancy. It's really just asking the questions that you want to know the answers to. So, how was implementation for you? overall. Did you like the person you were working with? Did you feel the process went well? Did you understand, the timeline and what was expected? So, you don't have to get tricky or sort of build fancy questions that kind of lead people down a path. Just ask the questions that you want to know the answers to. I would say at the very, very, very most, 20 questions on one of those more advanced surveys. I would say the fewer the better. So think about how can you get the answers that you want with less questions. And then, incenting them to do it, you know, bribery works well, Starbucks gift cards, if you have to. I think particularly around surveys, if you're surveying someone after they have churned, you might need to do more of an incentive. So, you can do things like that. But really, just the biggest incentive, and I'll come back to it again, is the shorter the survey, the more likely someone is to take it, and to actually have an incentive to give you feedback, just all on their own without you having to bribe them.
Awesome. We have a short question about NPS surveys, actually. So someone's
Okay.
asking, does NPS have to be a 1 to 10 score exactly?
Yeah, it's kind of its own thing, and yes, that is the format. I think it's actually 0 to 10. And so, if you want to go learn more about NPS, there are lots and lots of articles and books and consulting companies and stuff that can talk to you all day long about that. But yes, that there is a specific format for the NPS question, and there is a specific format for the 0 to 10 score and how that NPS score is calculated. And the idea behind that is to make it consistent from company to company. So if you're comparing two companies, you can compare their NPS scores, and it's apples to apples.
Awesome. So it's 56. We still have some questions, so I think we can take some time to answer a couple additional
Sure.
questions.
You tell me when I when I have to stop.
Awesome.
Okay.
So someone's asking if you can provide an example of data and metrics for customer goals.
Yeah, so a customer might have a goal. Let's see. I have one in my head that's for a client, but I probably don't want to share that. But um, I think, one of the goals that our customers had at Jazz, this is a company that I worked for that did ATS, so applicant tracking system. And so our goal was to work with people who were recruiters and to give them a tool that enabled them to hire top performing companies or top performing employees into their company. And so one of the big metrics that those recruiters would look at was turnover rate. So the idea behind looking at that was that if you hired a top performer, they would be more likely to stick around with your company, they would do a better job, and that would lower the turnover rate. And so we would look at turnover rate over time as a way to see whether or not a customer was achieving their goal of lowering turnover. With those customers, there were other goals that they had as well. I mean, those customers had goals of improving the candidate experience. And so there was people who were looking at our tool as a way to improve their reputation with candidates. So, there were different ways to measure those kinds of things. And it really varied from company to company. Turnover rate was one that was pretty consistent across the entire client base. And so as you start to have these conversations with customers, you'll start to find consistency. And so you can take the ones that are consistent, come up with metrics that you think are easy to look at and evaluate based on those metrics. And then you may have other ones that are unique to specific customers. And if those are key customers for you, you may want to kind of come up with ways to measure those that are sort of outside of the norm. I hope that
Awesome.
answers the question.
Definitely. Okay, let's try to answer one more question
Okay,
before we have to wrap up.
sounds good.
So this one is building on top of a question you answered earlier. So do you measure customer health, customer satisfaction, and customer engagement separately, as opposed to combining all of these into one comprehensive customer health score? So we already talked about engagement a little bit, but this ties customer satisfaction into it as well.
Yeah, so I think you measure those separately. they could feed into your overall customer health score. I mean, it's cool to think about the idea of, excuse me, I'm going to cough for 1 minute, so I'm just going to go mute for 1 second. Sorry about that. I just had to get a little sip of water there. I think it's really neat to think about the idea of having one score that you could look at that tells you everything you'd ever need to know. The reality is that that's not easy to make that work. So I do think you should measure other things as well. If you think that customer satisfaction at a certain level is likely to lead to churn, you should have that feed into your customer health score. The health score is an indication of overall health. But I personally think it's nice to look at different things throughout the customer's life cycle. And so I like to look at all of those separately.
Awesome. So it's 2. I think we should probably wrap up now. I'm really sorry for everyone that sent in questions that we didn't get to answer. But I think on the next slide, Kristen, you put your contact information, right? So if anyone has additional questions that we didn't answer, feel free to send an email to Kristen, and I'm sure she'd love to help you out.
Yeah, I would. So let me talk just briefly about the Success League. So the Success League is a customer success consulting firm that works with executives who are ready to build and grow their customer success organization. So we have a lot of resources that are free. You can sign up for our newsletter at thesuccessleague.io/blog. You can follow us on social media. We also publish all of our articles there. And then I do a podcast as well, so you can look for that on our website. If you're interested in consulting or coaching services, if you're a customer success leader, and I'll highlight this one, if you're a customer success leader and you need a little bit of help here and there, but you want to learn how to do this stuff yourself, I have a coaching option where I work side by side with customer success leaders over a 12-week period. We work on whatever kind of project they want to work on. And so that's an option, and that's outlined on the website. So if you're interested in that, take a peek at the website and then reach out to me. And if anybody has other questions after this webinar, I'm always happy to talk to other customer success leaders. So you can just reach out to me via email at kristen@thesuccessleague.io, or my phone number is here. It's 425-922-1637. And then I think you had some information you wanted to share about Amity as well.
Yeah, sure. So very shortly, I don't know if everyone knows about Amity, but Amity is a customer success management platform. We provide a software for CSMs to retain and manage their customers. So I don't really have any time to go in depth into it. And anyways, the address that you see right there is on our website, how to get a demo, and feel free to go ahead and go on the website, take a look, and request a demo, and one of our experts would love to give you a tour and tell you a little bit more about what we do. And the screenshots you can see is our brand new UI. So we got a fresh coat of paint for the new year. But yeah, so I think we have to go. But Kristen, thank you so much for all of that. That was fantastic.
Thanks, Mathilde. I really appreciate the opportunity to share on this really important topic.
Awesome, yeah. And everyone, thank you so much for being with us throughout this entire presentation. And thank you for all of your questions. As I was saying, if we didn't get to answer your questions, feel free to send us an email. And keep an eye on your inbox. You'll be receiving the webinar recording and the slides by the end of the week. Thank you so much. Have a great day. And Kristen, have a great day. And thank you so much as well.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Awesome.